What do you mean, you can't find the remote? Mark's voice echoed through the small, cluttered apartment, a blend of exasperation and mild amusement. His wife, Rachel, peeked her head around the corner of the couch, her eyes sparkling with a hint of mischief. I swear it was just here, she said, her hands spread out in innocent bewilderment. Rachel was the kind of beauty that could make a man's heart skip a beat with just a glance. Her long, golden hair cascaded down her shoulders, framing a face that looked as if it were painted by the soft strokes of an angel's brush. Her eyes, a deep shade of green, held a warmth that seemed to invite you into her soul, but behind that sweet, innocent facade was a mind that was as sharp as it was seductive. Mark knew it all too well. It was part of the reason he fell for her so hard, so fast. 2 years into their marriage, Rachel had become more than just a loving wife. She was a dominating force, a queen in their small kingdom of a home, and Mark was her devoted subject. It had started with playful teasing, Rachel asking Mark to do little things for her, like fetching her slippers or making her a cup of tea. Over time, it grew into something more. Rachel had a way of making even the most menial tasks seem like a gift from the gods, and Mark found himself eager to serve her every whim. He enjoyed the power she held over him, the way she made him feel both humbled and cherished. One evening, Rachel's voice was more commanding than usual. Come here, she said, pointing at her feet. They were propped up on the coffee table, bare and inviting. Mark approached, unsure of what she wanted. Rachel's smile was like a siren's call, luring him closer. I want you to give me a foot massage, she said, her eyes never leaving his. Mark knelt before her, his heart racing as he took her foot in his hands. Her skin was so soft, so smooth, and her toes wiggled slightly as he began to massage. Rachel leaned back into the couch cushions, a contented sigh escaping her lips. You're so good at this, she murmured. Why don't you kiss them? He hesitated for a moment, his mind racing with thoughts of what this meant, but the love and adoration he had for Rachel overpowered his doubts. He leaned in, placing a gentle kiss on the top of her foot. Rachel's eyes fluttered closed, and she hummed in pleasure. It was a simple act, but it sent a jolt of electricity through Mark's body. He had never felt so close to her, so connected. As the weeks passed, Rachel's requests grew bolder. One night, she asked Mark to kiss her toes, and then to lick them clean. The idea was so outlandish, yet he couldn't resist her. Rachel's scent filled his nostrils, a sweet and slightly salty taste lingering on his lips. She watched him intently, her breath hitching with each caress of his tongue. He felt a strange mix of humiliation and arousal, but the look on Rachel's face told him that he was pleasing her, and that was all that mattered. The transformation was gradual, almost imperceptible. Rachel began to wear more revealing outfits around the house, flaunting her body in a way that made Mark's pulse race. He found himself craving her approval, her command, her touch. He'd do anything to see that smile of satisfaction spread across her lips. One afternoon, Rachel called Mark into the bedroom, her voice filled with excitement. I have a surprise for you, she said, her eyes gleaming. On the bed lay a shiny, black pair of stiletto heels and a leash. Mark felt his stomach clench as she explained her newest idea. She wanted him to serve her as her personal footstool. Rachel's beauty was matched only by her imagination when it came to these games. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions raging within him. Rachel noticed his hesitation and stepped closer, placing a soft hand on his cheek. It's just a game, she whispered, her breath hot on his ear. A way for us to explore our love in new ways. Her touch was reassuring, but the sight of the leash made him swallow hard. But, what if someone sees? Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Rachel giggled, a sound that was both adorable and maddening in its power over him. We're alone, she said, her eyes twinkling. And even if we weren't, I'm your wife. You do what I say. Mark took another deep breath and nodded. He couldn't argue with that logic. Rachel was his wife, and he loved her more than anything. If this was what she wanted, then he would give it to her. He knelt before her, placing his hands on her ankles, and kissed the arch of her foot. Rachel's giggle turned into a full-blown laugh, and she playfully slapped his cheek. Not like that, she said, her voice playful. I want you to really worship them. He looked up at her, his heart racing. Rachel stepped closer, placing one foot on the floor and the other on his shoulder, her toes curling around his neck. She slid the leash into his hand, and his grip tightened around it. Good boy, she purred, her voice dripping with satisfaction. Mark leaned in, his nose pressing against the cool leather of the stiletto. He took a deep breath and began to lick her foot, starting at the toes and working his way down to the heel. Rachel's moans filled the room, encouraging him to be more thorough. As Rachel's foot rested on his shoulder, she leaned back against the bedpost, watching him with a mix of amusement and arousal. She tapped her other foot impatiently against the floor. Now the other one, she said, her voice firm. Mark obeyed without question, switching his attention to her other foot. The leather was warm from her skin, and the scent of her perfume mingled with something else, a hint of power. He licked and kissed, his tongue tracing the delicate lines of her arch. Rachel's foot began to shake with pleasure, and she had to grip the bedpost to keep herself steady. With each passing moment, Mark felt his resistance crumbling. Rachel had become more than just his wife, she was his queen, his goddess, and he was her devoted servant. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and sensations, but one thing was clear, he was addicted to the power dynamic between them. The way she dominated him, the way she made him feel so small and yet so important in her eyes, it was intoxicating. As Rachel's moans grew louder, Mark's own desire grew. He knew that he would do anything she asked of him, no matter how degrading it might seem to others. This was their secret, their twisted little game that brought them closer together than ever before. Rachel leaned down and whispered in his ear, her breath hot and heavy. You're doing so well, my love. I knew you'd make the perfect footstool. Her words sent a shiver down his spine, and Mark felt his cock throb in his pants. Rachel noticed his arousal and smirked. Looks like someone's enjoying themselves, she said, her voice dripping with amusement. She reached down and stroked his cheek with the toes of her free foot. But remember, your pleasure comes from serving me. With a final kiss to the base of Rachel's foot, Mark sat back on his heels, his eyes never leaving hers. She stepped off him and sailed out of the room, her hips swaying with the confidence of a woman in complete control. Mark's mind raced as he contemplated the depth of his submission to her. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once, like standing on the edge of a cliff with the wind whispering sweet nothings in his ear. Rachel returned with a knowing smile, holding a small, velvet-covered box. She opened it to reveal a golden anklet with a tiny padlock attached. This will be your collar, she said, her voice low and seductive. To remind you of your place.